Never violate deontological first principles that defines the beauty of the West. Under no circumstances. There is no, I believe in freedom of speech, but. The minute that you say but, you're a cretin, you're a fraud.
I come across this quote from you, which maybe sums up almost everything you do. And you said this: any human endeavor rooted in the pursuit of truth must rely on facts and not feelings.
For many things in life, we navigate through the world through a consequentialist prism. But when it comes to the pursuit of truth, I argue that you have to be deontological. In other words, we can all be in favor of transgender rights without murdering truth. We don't have to say that men too can menstruate. I could be for individual rights. I could be for fighting for a world free of bigotry without murdering truth. What neuroparasites do is exactly hijack your neuronal circuitry to the benefit of the parasite. They quietly lead us to the abyss of infinite lunacy so that we say things like, of course men can menstruate.
You throw the truth out, then we lose everything. We can still have all of our nobilities, we can have our causes, we can have our empathies, but if it doesn't all come back to some facts, we need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, well, what are we doing here, guys? Like, we're just kidding ourselves.
All of these idea pathogens were spawned on university campuses. It's not the fact that there's going to be 6'4" guys knocking at my door. It's the fact that in the internal privacy of my mind, I am calculating as a student, should I say something in class or will I be penalized?
Or anything else around you, and pretty soon subconsciously you're self-censoring and just numbing yourself, and then now you really are a zombie, which ultimately harms humanity. It harms our truth, it harms our progress, it harms everything.
Do we want to live in a world where there's this kind of overlord oversight over our every syllable? I venture not. I am a honey badger, and honey badgers, as you know, the expression is don't give a F. Live your life that way. And you know what? It's liberating. In Judaism, there's an expression, you never kneel in front of anybody other than God. Now, I'm not a very religious person, but I live my life under that. There is nothing worse for me than to lose a millimeter of my honor or dignity. So in other words, I walk like a 70-foot tall person. I'm the height of Messi.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Gad Saad, the author, evolutionary behavioral scientist, and professor of marketing. You pioneered the use of evolutionary psychology and consumer behavior and have written over 75 scientific papers. Your hugely popular YouTube channel and podcast, The Sad Truth, deals with issues around religion, freedom of speech, and wokeism. You've written 4 books, the last of which, The Parasitic Mind, How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense, explores how the progressive left is successfully moving ideas once considered radical from university campuses into political and corporate arenas. You believe that the West's intellectual freedom is at risk of extinction if we don't stop the spread of dangerous idea pathogens that are killing common sense and our freedom of speech. Dr. Saad, welcome to London Real.
Thank you so much for that lovely invitation. I'm so glad that we were finally able to make it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Now, I'm really looking forward to it. And, I come across this quote from you, which maybe sums up almost everything you do. And you said this: any human endeavor rooted in the pursuit of truth must rely on fact and not feelings. It's a very interesting statement. I graduated from 1993 with a degree in engineering from MIT, and I was taught that it all came down to the scientific method to prove things. And now, 30-some years later, it seems like the world has changed dramatically. And I really want to get your thoughts. Also, this is personal because my stepdaughter just started school in Boston at a university there. She's 18, just turned 19 today. And so I'm deeply concerned that she's about to go into a world that I don't even understand, that I can't control. So you tell me, where do we start, doctor?
Right. Well, I guess maybe we could start with my most recent experience at USC. So last week, I was invited to speak at a one-day event celebrating the 10-year anniversary of a center at USC. The center is called the Center for Economic and Social Research, and it was a day to celebrate the values of the Enlightenment. And so I decided that I would deliver a lecture on something that is very relevant to the quote that you introduced the segment with, the dichotomy between, pursuing truth versus feelings. But I'm going to put it in more formal terms. So I talked at USC about deontological ethics versus consequentialist ethics. And so let me spend a minute or two explaining what that is. A deontological statement would be an absolute statement. So, for example, if I say it is never okay to lie, that would be a deontological statement. On the other hand, if I say it is okay to lie if I wish to spare someone's feelings. So if your spouse asks you, do I look fat in those jeans, and you wish to have a long marriage, you might wish to put on your consequentialist hat and say, no, you've never looked more beautiful. So for many things in life, we navigate through the world through a consequentialist prism. But when it comes to the pursuit of truth, I argue that you have to be deontological. In other words, there is no freedom of inquiry, but ... There is no freedom of expression, but ... In other words, I don't need to worry about what the downstream consequences of my research might be, right? So, for example, if I'm studying the difference between religious groups in terms of their proclivity to commit terror attacks, well, some would argue that, well, you shouldn't do this kind of research because even if that research were to prove veridical, you would be, quote, marginalizing this group, and therefore you shouldn't do it on consequentialist grounds. Whereas I argue, no, that's a very dangerous, slippery slope. And so I tried to take that message to the people at USC in speaking about your stepdaughter and the viper's den that she's about to enter. And you would have thought that, an esteemed place like USC would be very open to what I consider to be very, very non-corrosive, statements that I'm making, defend freedom of inquiry, freedom of speech, individual dignity, personal agency, the scientific method. And if you saw the hostility that I faced, now the hostility was not, they tried to shout me down. They didn't throw tomatoes at me. It wasn't a physical confrontation, but the level of either overt hostility or passive aggressive hostility. So I was there for the whole day. And usually, people will come up to me, if not to take selfies with me or so on, they at least engage me. It's warm, it's academic. The manner by which people were turning their back to me, as though I were this, I was basically indistinguishable from Himmler, was really laughable. Two people were very, very angry that I proposed something that was truly beyond the pale, because I argued that, we can all be in favor of transgender rights without murdering truth. We don't have to say that men too can menstruate and that men too can bear children in the service of protecting your rights. And people thought that those were very, very, very dangerous statements. So much so that one person argued that kind of speech should be regulated by the government. So if I am at a USC conference speaking about the values of the Enlightenment, and a statement such as men cannot bear children can cause such a reaction, we're down a pretty, pretty dark abyss.
Well, that used to get you canceled on Twitter before Elon bought it. And so I guess this has been going on for a while. A quick question for you. Were you getting that from the students or from the faculty as well? And do you think it being in California, where I was born, where you spent time as well, had a reason for that?
Of all of the hostile crowd that I faced in the Q&A, I think only one looked young enough to be a student. And some, I actually recognize them. The first one that spoke is actually a very respected psychologist who was so angered by me that his voice was quivering. I mean, you know when someone is incredibly angry and nervous, that they're having a hard time catching their breath because that's how triggered they were. So no, it may or may not surprise your audience that these weren't students who were triggered by me. They were actual faculty members, if not research scientists.
And
now, sorry, to answer your question about California, I don't doubt that there is an element of wokeness that is coming from the fact that USC is in California. But believe me, all of the universities throughout these beautiful lands have fallen to these idea pathogens. So I could have been anywhere else. I mean, I've given talks at University of Michigan where people were just as hostile. So I don't think it is something that is unique to California.
See, I don't think it's actually hit us over here in the UK yet, Doctor. I see these things on Twitter and YouTube, and for me, it almost looks like I'm watching a movie. It doesn't seem real. But I'm sure if I was in that classroom with you, I would be like, does it feel sometimes that this is almost a different species than you? It's almost like a completely different type of animal that can get, I don't know, agitated or not listen to reason? Because you seem like the kind of man that comes in and you're like, doesn't everyone see this is logic? This is the scientific method. This is why we came so far in 500 years. And it seems like you're almost speaking a different language to this new species. The incredulity that you're attributing to me is exactly how I feel. So despite the fact that I've been navigating in this ecosystem for close to 30 years as a professor, despite the fact that I've written The Parasitic Mind, hence you would think that there is nothing that could surprise me. As I walked out of the USC event, and my family, by the way, had joined me. So my children and wife were in the audience. I have young children who were uniquely disturbed by the hostility that they saw their father, being exposed to. And so as we left and we were walking around, I said exactly what you said without saying that they're a different species. I said, I can't believe that I can trigger the type of hostility that I just, was the recipient of for saying things that should be so banal and obvious, right? I mean, you would think that we have won that debate, hundreds of years ago. We had the scientific revolution, we had the Renaissance, we had the values of the Enlightenment. We were coasting along so beautifully, and now to say things like men can't bear children is something that should be regulated by the government. By the way, I'm really hopeful that USC, they've promised me that they will be sending me the files of the day's event, which of course when they do, if they do, I will be posting. So hopefully everybody could see the kind of lunacy. So yes, I am baffled by it, but I think that exactly speaks to the key premise of the parasitic mind, which is, we attribute, the faculty of reason to human beings. And yet, just like countless other animals in the animal kingdom, we could be parasitized by brainworms. In this case, the brainworm is not an actual physical brainworm. That's why I call them idea pathogens. But they end up doing the exact same thing as other parasitic infestations that go to the brain, which is they completely zombify you. They take supposedly intelligent people and make them behave in ways that are truly baffling to the human spirit. Now, I wasn't there, and I'm curious, if I was to try to get into their minds, what are they thinking? Like, what are the kind of things they say back to you? I'm sure it's not one thing, but I'm sure it's probably about 3 different things. But what are the things that are uttering from their minds? Is it culture's being oppressed and we don't want to upset them, we want to repair for them, we want to take away our privilege and not... What is coming from them? Because obviously they think they're right, so it's interesting to me to find out why they think they're right.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I thank you for it. So there are several elements, but if off the top of my head, one that doesn't capture the full phenomenon, but then we can drill down further, is that they are driven by a sense of what I call faux empathy, right? And it perfectly speaks to the distinction between what I set up originally in our conversation between deontological ethics and consequentialist ethics. If I am a pursuer and defender of truth in a deontological way, then I'm never encumbered by, as I said, the downstream effects of, oh, but if I say that men cannot bear children, that is a statement that is fully founded in truth. Therefore, the fact that there might be 0.01% of people who suffer from gender dysphoria who might be hurt by that statement is of no consequence to me. Not because I'm a mean person, because my desire to defend truth and to navigate through reality supersedes my desire to be full empathetic toward you. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not a very empathetic person. I'm sensitive and sentimental to a fault, but my desire to defend truth supersedes that. So I think each of these idea pathogens, which we can, I suspect, get into during our conversation. So postmodernism, cultural relativism, social constructivism, they're all different variants of parasitic idea pathogens, but they share one thing in common. They start off with a noble cause, which then in the service of that noble cause, you're willing to murder and rape truth. And I argue, no, I can chew gum and walk at the same time. I could be for individual rights. I could be for fighting for a world free of bigotry without murdering truth in that service. And so let me give you a concrete example. Equity feminism is a great idea that most reasonable people can support, which is that men and women should be equal under the law. There shouldn't be institutionalized barriers for either sex to flourish. So that's great. But then militant feminists took this idea and said, well, wait a second. No, in the pursuit of eradicating, quote, patriarchal sexist ways, we now need to promulgate the idea that men and women are indistinguishable from each other. Men and women do not have any evolved biological based sex differences, because by promulgating that utter nonsense position, then it will better allow us to fight against the sexist status quo. So you could see again how it's consequentialist. In the pursuit of a otherwise noble goal, I'm willing to fudge the truth in the pursuit of that goal. So to answer your question, and hopefully not too long-winded away, they're all coming from what originally seems like a noble place. Why are you marginalizing the noble and peaceful religion of Islam with your facts, Dr. Saad? Why are you marginalizing? Why don't you instead say that all religions have both good and bad people, and all religions could potentially lead to terrorism? Well, in an incredibly banal way, that is potentially true. But you might imagine that extremist Jains, people who practice Jainism, who walk around with sweeping the floor in front of them, lest they might literally crush an ant. That's how committed they are to never harming any biological organism. You might imagine that extremist Jains might be less likely to engage in terrorist acts than other religions. But according to the noble people at USC, that would marginalize people. So shut your mouth and go, la, 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 I don't see the truth. So I think that's the reason why they do what they do.
Right. So I think you explained that really well. With the militant feminists, they believe in this concept so much that they're willing to pace it above the truth. And coming from the scientific method or a science system where I was kind of born as well, you're like, but if you throw the truth out, then we lose everything. We lose our sanity. And you're like, so even though it might offend people, we always need to honor the truth first. We can still have all of our nobilities, we can have our causes, we can have our empathies, but if it doesn't all come back to some facts, we need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, well, what are we doing here, guys? Like, we're just kidding ourselves.
Perfectly right. Exactly right. And that's what frustrates me so much, because the reality is I'm probably more sentimental and sensitive than all of these people. That's why I call it faux empathy, because when you drill down with a lot of these people, they really are, they're authoritarian, but they protect themselves with the cloak of so-called progressivism. But nothing in what they do is actually consistent with truly classical liberal values. And that's why I get so frustrated. So to go back to your earlier question about, do I think that they're aliens? I look at them with the incredulity as though they are aliens, because so the first gentleman who spoke that I said is a very well-known psychologist. I mean, if you look objectively at his scientific output, you'd say, I mean, obviously this person is not, a babbling idiot. I mean, he's a very accomplished psychologist. He used to be at University of Michigan. Now he's at USC. He certainly has had a wonderful, esteemed career, and yet he is fully parasitized. He's a complete zombie. And so, and I think, again, that's the power of the metaphor of using this neuroparasitological model, because what neuroparasites do is exactly hijack your neuronal circuitry to the benefit of the parasite, right? And that's what these ideas do. They quietly lead us to the abyss of infinite lunacy, so that we say things like, of course men can menstruate. Of course you can have 6'4" biological males competing with 5'1" biological women, and there are no innate differences between these two. Men don't have any morphological, physiological, anatomical, hormonal, behavioral differences from women. This is not me satirizing their positions. These are their official positions. So when we've gotten that far along the abyss, Houston, we have a problem.
Doctor, can you tell me where this all, or when all this happened and why all this happened? Because I don't remember maybe this being an issue. Okay, I was at MIT. We didn't exactly talk about social causes. We were in the lab and they were just beating me until I could figure out my differential equations. But I don't remember it in the early 90s. When did this come about? Why did it come about? I have a guy that's been on my show who's a 77-year-old man who's got a castle in Scotland. He's a high-performance coach, extremely politically incorrect. And he said that political correctness is a manifestation of a lack of self-esteem. He's been saying that for 20 years. And maybe that's just one part of it. But where do you think this came from?
So again, fantastic question, because if you wish to understand, I mean, in the exact same way that we try to understand where the COVID virus originated, and in the pursuit of that objective, people were feathered and tarred as racist, because you can't even talk about the geographic origin of an actual biological virus anymore, lest it might marginalize people. So to your point, where did these idea pathogens begin? Why did they begin? Well, of course, I'm here to tell you that, and in a slight rephrasing of George Orwell's famous quip, it takes intellectuals to come up with some of the uniquely dumbest ideas. And so all of these idea pathogens were spawned and began their proliferation on university campuses. So that explains the origin. Now, when did they come about? It depends on the specific idea pathogen. So cultural relativism, the idea that we can't really tell, judge a culture unless we judge it in its own context. There are no human universals. Each culture is a microcosm of its own reality. That started, almost 80, 90 years ago by Franz Boas, a cultural anthropologist at Columbia, and then his students promoted that. Now, that idea pathogen, and the reason why I call it idea pathogen is because it is perfectly incorrect. All cultures are not equal. Cultures that cut off the clitorises of little girls are not equal to cultures that don't do that. Cultures that throw off gays from rooftops are not equal to cultures that don't. So the idea that all cultures are equal is insanely laughable. Okay, but so let's talk about why that idea pathogen began. Well, in the social sciences, one defines their identity based on their abdication of biology, right? So if you are a sociologist or an economist or most psychologists or an anthropologist, unless you're a biological anthropologist, you share your common disdain for using biology to explain human behavior. So, and that's something that I have faced from the start of my career, when I tried to Darwinize the behavioral sciences in general and the business school in particular, right? So I came in 1994 as a fresh young assistant professor, where I was arguing, well, how could we study consumer behavior and economic decision-making and employee behavior and employer behavior without ever recognizing the biological and evolutionary mechanisms that drive our behaviors? Surely, as consumers, we don't somehow exist in a plane outside the purview of our biological heritage. And that was viewed as, this is insane. What kind of nonsense are you saying, Professor Saad? So cultural relativism arose precisely because, again, it came from a, quote, noble place, which is there were all sorts of miscreants and cretins that had misused evolutionary theory. Think about the British social Darwinists, who it had nothing to do with Darwin, but they usurped Darwinian theory to say, hey, there's a natural struggle between the classes. We're the upper class, you're the lower class. Hey, that's just nature. So if you die out in your polluted environments without any education, hey, that's just nature. Then the eugenicists come along and say, hey, that's Darwinian. If we sterilize gay people so that they can't reproduce, hey, that's just natural. That's Darwinian. The Nazis came along and said, hey, it's a natural struggle between races. We're the Aryans, we win. Hey, that's just Darwinian. And so the cultural anthropologists said, well, we need to find a way through consequentialist ethics to create new edifices of reason bereft of biology, because then that could, stop future scientists or politicians or, demagogues from misusing biology. So that would be a long-winded answer of how that particular cultural, idea pathogens came to be. Postmodernism, on the other hand, is a bit, younger. So about 40, 50 years ago, a whole bunch of French imbeciles, Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Jacques Lacan, and then others, developed the idea that, there is no objective truth. Language creates reality. That's called deconstructionism by Jacques Derrida. To speak of a universal truth is insane because we're always bound by our idiosyncrasies, by our personal biases, by subjectivity. So there is no capital T truth. So that's why, by the way, I refer to postmodernism as the granddaddy of all idea pathogens, because you can't wake up as a scientist in the morning if you were a postmodernist, because scientists, while they recognize that all truths are provisional, meaning that what was true 50 years ago may no longer be true today, science is autocorrective, we do operate under the premise that there is a truth out there to be discovered. Well, postmodernists say, no, there is no such thing. And so depending on the idea pathogen, the timing of it is slightly different, but I would say between 40 and 80 years ago is when most of them happen. And then it takes a while for it to simmer, and then they all come together and slowly erode our edifices of reason. And that's where we are today.
Has social media accelerated it because of the monkey see, monkey do effect, or everyone can publish ideas, or has that accelerated it, and will it continue to accelerate it?
So social media in of itself can be used for good or bad. So in the same way that dreadful ideas could spread, to your point, one can easily argue, but then why can't people who've got the good ideas also use social media as a tool to spread better ideas? So I don't think it's necessarily social media as an inherent system that spreads bad ideas. Now, what you could argue is that there are inherently more, blue-haired Taliban activist types who use social media, and therefore they end up being overrepresented on that medium. But it's not inherently the media. Now, the other thing you can also argue is that to the extent, until Elon Musk came along and bought Twitter, to the extent that those social media companies are run by supremely woke people who banish others who may not share their views, then to your point, you're exactly right. But inherently, in principle, social media could be used for good or bad. I would have never have built the platform that I have had it not been for all of the tools that are afforded to me through social media, right? I mean, who could have thought that when I first started my YouTube channel, right? I mean, you would think I'm a professor. I publish papers in peer-reviewed journals. You get excited as an academic if your paper gets cited 100 times 10 years after you publish it, 100 times. Well, I could get on Joe Rogan's show and there's been 20 million downloads. How does that compare in terms of the speed and rapidity of the information? So again, social media is not inherently nefarious. It's the people who control social media that we have to worry about.
All right, well then let's talk about that phenomenon. Probably the best way to do it is to talk about the Twitter files, which were revealed after Elon decided to buy Twitter, which some people said was not a company. He was actually buying a crime scene. And I've watched the Twitter files come out. I kind of have a vested interest in that because we were censored pretty heavily in April of 2020, and I can get into that later. But what do you see being revealed in the Twitter files? Like you said, I think it's been proven that 97% of the staff members there all either voted or donated to the Democratic Party. So I think there even analytics of showing they were a certain way, even though everyone kind of knew that. What do you see there, Doctor?
Yeah, right. Well, actually, in the Parasitic Mind, there's a section where I break down the political donations, Democrat to Republican, across not just Twitter, across all of the major, social media players. And it is simply astounding. I mean, it's just, it's not 70-30, right? It's 99.2 to 0.08. It's 97 to 3. It's at that level of bias. So you're exactly right. Everybody already knew it. I think all that you're going to get through the analysis of the Twitter files is that people are going to have new hard data to support what everybody already knew. So it's certainly not a useless exercise to go through it, but I doubt that you will see anything that most sane people could not have already told you. I told you so. I already knew that because, I mean, I saw it just, luckily I was never banned from Twitter, but I very much noticed that my voice seemed to never get amplified. I mean, I was completely stagnant for a very, very long time. Then Elon Musk came along, and suddenly the explosion of subscribers I had, I mean, literally from one day to the next was just breathtaking. So I don't think we needed the Twitter files to know what was happening, but it certainly helps in terms of building a case of how dangerous it could be to have these companies who control all of our informational flow being lopsided.
Have you gone deep on the Twitter files and looked into some of the things surrounding the FBI and the CIA or some of the other repressions or shadow banning? Have you gone into that?
I haven't, in that the most that I've done is when they would release, whichever journalist was handling a particular, instantiation of the Twitter files, when they would release their, like a long thread, right? A 30 piece or 30 tweet thread, I would just read those, but I haven't gone into a deep dive into the files. Are you asking because you have and there's something that you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, well, so I've kept an eye on it. I'll just tell you quickly our story, and I want to get your thoughts
Sure.
on maybe what happened with us. So, Doctor, I started this show in 2011. I was inspired by Joe Rogan. I was an early fan of the UFC and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I was watching his show even 13, 14 years ago when it was just on Vimeo, wasn't even on YouTube. So I was a fan, and I got jaded with the banking industry, and I just decided I was going to start my own version. And we were having long-form conversations, unedited, unscripted, and I did this for 9 years. Got up to 2 million subscribers on YouTube, 500 million views, published about 10,000 videos on the YouTube platform. I was a partner. I'd gone down to the headquarters, obviously getting paid ad revenue. And on April 6th of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, I had a guest on my show that was asking questions about masks, about PCR tests, about if we were doing the right things. It was the second largest YouTube live stream in the world that day, 65,000 concurrent viewers. The largest was President Trump's coronavirus briefing at the White House that night. So he just beat us out just by about 20,000 live viewers. And based on a previous episode I'd had with this guest that had been watched about 10 million times, the live stream was 4x, so we extrapolated this would have been watched 40 million times, this video podcast, which at the time would have been the most watched podcast in history because Elon smoking weed on Rogan was about 25, 30 million. So this thing was gonna go to Pluto. And it was an amazing conversation. Again, it's me and a 67-year-old man having a calm conversation like this. We didn't incite violence. We didn't incite political overthrow. We were asking questions when, funny enough, nobody else was. 30 minutes later, Doctor, YouTube deleted and banned that video. And it was the first time that ever happened to me in 9 years. I thought the weirdos got censored, not me. And it started off this massive fight I had with YouTube and all the other technology platforms about what I could publish. And I was right on the cutting edge of it. And we're about to release a documentary film about everything that happened. But just to finish the story, I ended up getting 2 strikes, almost had my entire channel deleted and disappeared, which by the way was also 9 years of my life. It was my digital identity that was being taken away. I got removed from Dropbox, which is interesting because I didn't know they would watch my content, but they took my account out. PayPal suspended my account with over $100,000 in there. obviously shadow banned by Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn dropped me, like I said, a bunch of other things systematically blocked me. And when I said, who's looking out for my right for freedom of speech, and I looked at the governments, they all pointed the finger, and I know you talk about this in your book, and they said, no, that's a private company, and you ticked the box on their private policy, so you got to go talk to them. And I was like, well, when you lock us in our houses, this feels like a public utility. And there was actually some precedent here in the UK when a company acts as a public utility, it might have to follow the law of the land. But when I finally looked at the Twitter files and I saw that the FBI and the CIA were going into Twitter and suppressing the right to free speech, I thought, wow, here I am asking my government to protect me. They point the finger at the private sector, and then meanwhile, they go in the back door and violate my rights by telling the private sector what to do. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I leave that to my guests. But it also possibly makes sense, and I'm waiting for the YouTube files, for a reason why I might have been systematically deplatformed across a lot of different technology companies at once, if it was something like an FBI, CIA, Senate subcommittee. So that's what happened to me. Final point, wow. We ended up creating our own platform, and we pulled off on May 3rd of 2020, the largest live stream of a human conversation on our own platform. And I'll be honest, it was kind of a big fuck you to the tech platforms to show them that we could do it ourselves. And so that's how it kind of ended, didn't really end. So that's what happened to me. What are your thoughts on that, Doctor?
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm really sorry it happened to you, but I wish I could say I'm surprised. But to me, it's like you just described every Tuesday of anyone who says anything that those our overlords don't agree with. Now, again, I've never been kicked off in the way you were and the strikes and so on. But first of all, let me just say this: the story that you just said, had you told that story at USC when I was there, I can assure you that you wouldn't have had one empathetic or sympathetic ear. To the contrary, they would be, well, they should have gotten rid of you even earlier. It's amazing that they let you stay there. And again, they would have said so precisely using a consequentialist ethic, which is, it doesn't matter whether what you and that gentleman were discussing could potentially be true. As far as they're concerned, it was too dangerous given public policy measures for you to be holding such conversations. So, I mean, the Nazis used the consequentialist ethic for why they need to get rid of, those vermin Jews, right? So the idea of using consequentialism to support your otherwise, quote, noble cause is an indelible part of the human spirit. So it doesn't surprise me. Now, in my case, speaking, I think the gentleman you were talking to was about COVID, correct?
Correct.
So let me tell you, and I mentioned this, by the way, at USC. And I don't know if this was the gentleman that you talked to, but do you know who Matt Ridley is?
I just had him on my show, actually, about 3-4 weeks ago.
Okay, well, so Matt and I know each other well. He's been on my show, I think, twice. He actually provided a blurb for The Parasitic Mind. Just a lovely chap, trained in evolutionary biology and so on and so forth. House of Lords, so certainly not a quack guy. His team reached out to me when his last book came out, where he was discussing the possibility that it's the lab leak theory and so on. And at the time, and I said, I'm ashamed that I'm admitting this. And I said this at USC. At the time that they reached out to me, I told his folks, I can't remember who it was, the publicist or the publisher or whatever. I said, look, I'm perfect. I mean, I'm the ultimate honey badger, right? I mean, I get a million death threats from people that are a lot scarier than, the mask orgy folks. But let's be pragmatic. If we hold the chat, here's what's going to happen. It's going to be removed 14 seconds after we post it. And in the best case scenario, I get a strike against my channel. In the worst case scenario, I'm taken off. And just like you said 9 years. I started in 2014. I'm going to lose all the years of effort that I've built to build this inventory of content. And so I said, look, it seems like reckless martyrdom to just do it. So it's not that I'm afraid to hold difficult conversations because I've taken positions that are astoundingly more, quote, dangerous than discussing the lab leak theory. But pragmatically, I know it's not going to lead us anywhere. Now that you can't imagine how much that kept me up at night, because what was happening is, in my pragmatic understanding of how the overlords control us, I was acquiescing to the fact, you know what, let's not have the chat. It's not going to lead anywhere. And I felt dirty. I felt disgusted. I felt cowardly, even though I was being too harsh on myself. Because as Aristotle explained to us, being a cowardly soldier is bad, but being a reckless martyr of a soldier is also bad. There is the golden mean. And so I was kind of beating myself because I was saying, well, why am I being pragmatic in my calculation? But the reality is, I know what would have happened, the exact same thing that happened to you. Now, is this the kind of world we want to live in, where someone like me or someone like you decides, should I even have this conversation? By the way, that's the biggest danger is, and I discussed this in the Parasitic Mind, it's the calculus of self-censorship that's the most dangerous part. It's not the fact that there's going to be 6'4" guys knocking at my door. It's the fact that in the internal privacy of my mind, I am calculating as a student, should I say something in class or will I be penalized? Should I host Matt Ridley or will my YouTube channel? That's how freedom dies bit by bit. And so I'm truly sorry for what you went through, but I'm glad that you've come back bigger and stronger than ever before.
Yeah, I'm thankful for it now, but it was a real defining moment in my life. And I don't know if it was my upbringing in the States, but my initial reaction was one of anger when that happened. And so we just fought back and just decided to push it. But the self-censorship is the most dangerous thing, because you start doing it at a subconscious level. And it's that parasite, which you were saying, and that might be about your wife and the genes or anything else around you. And pretty soon, subconsciously, you're self-censoring and just numbing yourself. And then now you really are a zombie. And you walk around and you can't say what you think, which ultimately harms humanity. It harms our truth. It harms our progress. It harms everything. And to watch it happen on a social media channel is fascinating, because first they take away your shares and your virality. Then when you're still a bad boy, then they demonetize you. Then when you're still a bad boy, they give you a strike. And then when you really don't want to listen, they take you off the platform. And these little things start to just really make you smaller and smaller and smaller. And it works.
Can I give you a few examples that please. I've had? So on LinkedIn, I've had countless posts removed for insane reasons. So for example, if I criticize some policy of, by Joe Biden's administration, I will receive a thing. This tweet, this post has been removed because it is considered, unprofessional and harassment and bullying. So in a free society, never mind that I'm a professor who weighs in on these issues. If I'm a trucker, anybody, I cannot directly criticize a policy by the president of the United States, because that's considered harassment and bullying. To whom? To Joe Biden, right? So I've had countless of those on LinkedIn. On Facebook, I've had several strikes where they say, you're about to lose your Facebook page forever, because I will take a screenshot of a death threat that I received. For those of you who don't know, who are listening to me for the first time, we are Lebanese Jews. I'm Jewish from Lebanon, from the Middle East. So I received many death threats of this is how we're going to boil you, Jew. This is how we're going to put you in the oven, Jew. We like you, so you'll be the last to go in the oven, and all kinds of stuff. So I will take a screenshot of it, especially when the person is stupid enough to identify who they are or their email, and I will advertise it. I will get banned for spreading hate. So then I try to write to Facebook. I say, I'm just describing the death threat that I'm receiving. Now, if you want to be charitable, you might say, oh, but that's just an algorithmic glitch, or that's just, the person who is reviewing the things that is not paying attention. But again, do we want to live in a world where there's this kind of overlord oversight over our every syllable? I venture not.
No, we don't. And sorry for the fact that you get those death threats. They're not nice. I ended up running for mayor of London afterwards, and I got them too, which isn't a nice thing, but when they start threatening your family members, that's really not nice. And then when the police tell you there's not much they can do, it's not a nice thing to do. But I guess it's just par for the course if you want to try to get these messages out there. Doctor, you have something in the book where you say,
to continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.